Pretty soon, federal agents are not just setting up drug arrests so that they can cut the heroin and keep a bunch for themselves and use it to make cases. They actually go into business for themselves, selling heroin and making a lot of money. I first started getting interested in the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking when I did my second book called The Phoenix Program, which is about um, the CIA's program, which started in 1967 in South Vietnam to what they called neutralize the Viet Cong insurgency. Very complicated story. Uh, uh, but in the process of writing this book about CIA operations in South Vietnam, I heard a lot of stories that the CIA was bringing drugs in from Laos and allowing the people that were the CIA was working with in South Vietnam, generals, senior police officials, politicians, the CIA was allowing these people to bring the drugs into South Vietnam and distribute them around South Vietnam as sort of a payoff for following the CIA's policies and getting them to fight the war on America's behalf. But that book wasn't about drug trafficking, so I didn't really get into it at all in that book, The Phoenix Program. But I decided I would write my next book about the CIA's involvement in drug trafficking. And it was pretty easy because I had met CIA officials, CIA officers who knew a lot about it. And one of them was a guy named Tully Akamora, an Italian American. And before Tully was involved with a program that actually morphed into the Phoenix Program. He was a advisor to a senior Vietnamese police official who ran all of the sort of anti Viet Cong infrastructure operations in Saigon. He knew everybody and everything. He knew all the secrets, and we remained friends. And he knew that I wanted to write this book about CIA drug trafficking, and he agreed to help me. And
Why do you think he helped you?
well, yeah, and the reason he helped me because he liked me, and it was an interesting subject, and he helped me by introducing me to people. Tully was a World War II veteran, and he went into the CIA from the military. He had a military rank as a colonel eventually, but he started working for the CIA during the Korean War, and after the Korean War, he went to Italy on behalf as a CIA officer. And when he was in Rome, he worked with a couple of guys who were at the time were in Rome working for the old Bureau of Narcotics. Charlie Siragusa was one of them. Siragusa was actually in charge of all the CIA's foreign operations worldwide. And another guy he worked with his name was Hank Manfredi. And Manfredi was pretty much the principal Bureau of Narcotic agent in Rome from 1959 until 1966. And being Italo-Americans, and Tully was in Italy from 59 to 66. They bonded. They were all from the Bronx. Charlie Siragusa, Tully, this guy Hank Manfredi, and they helped each other out. Of course, you have to understand the politics that were going on inside Italy at the time, but of course, it had a lot to do with the Mafia, and the Mafia was involved with the Christian Democrats, and the CIA was trying to keep the Soviet Communist Party out of Italy, and so their operations, regular CIA operations, Tully was an advisor to the Carbonari, which was like a state police force, and so he was intimately involved. Him and this guy Hank Manfredi would just sit down in an office together and trade information. And eventually, Hank Manfredi actually went to work for the CIA and was one of those, was a Bureau of Narcotic uses job as a narcotic agent as a cover. He actually was a CIA officer using narcotic bureau cover. So at some point him and Tully became colleagues. But the CIA was definitely interested in monitoring the mafia, and was definitely interested in its drug trafficking, all the drug trafficking that was going on in Italy. So then there was a big you must be aware that after World War II, a lot of major mafioso guys were deported back to Italy. Uh, Frank Coppola was a very important one. Lucky Luciano, of course, was his sentence was commuted, and eventually he was sent back to Italy, and he set up his headquarters in Naples. Coppola was in uh, Sicily, and of course they revived the drum trade. And Charlie Siragusa had been sent to, who was a very good friend of Tully's, had been sent to Italy in 1951, basically to monitor these deportees and to establish the connections that they had with a lot of mafia guys who were American mafia guys who were on the receiving end of heroin that a lot of it was being diverted from Italian pharmaceutical firms, but of course, a lot of it was just being sent to the United States the old-fashioned way. Um, Opium from Turkey was being refined in underground heroin factories in Italy and in Marseille, and Italian and Corsican smugglers were sending it to their colleagues in New York City and elsewhere around the country. And so Siragusa, who was Tully's good friend, had actually opened up the Bureau of Narcotics office in Rome, and his job was keeping track of these people and all their connections around the world. And Tully's other good friend, Hank Manfredi, was actually had as his job uh, keeping track of Lucky Luciano, and that's one of the things that he did. There was a very important uh, meeting in Palermo in 1957, where the uh, mafia in Italy and the mafia in the United States actually arrived at a new agreement for how the heroin trade would be organized and conducted. And Hank Manfredi had that whole Palermo meeting wiretapped and knew everything that everybody was talking about the whole time it was going on. The Bureau of Narcotics was a very effective organization, and they knew everything that the mafia was up to, thanks to guys like Siragusa and Manfredi in Italy. And as a CIA officer who was interested in the same things, and as another Italian American, these guys bonded together, and they were very close. And
Now,
at the same time,
oh yeah,
there was a young uh, Italian American federal narcotic agent who was working in Rome at the time, and his name was Andy Tartaglino, and he was Charlie Siragusa and Hank Manfredi's protege. When Tully was back in Vietnam on his second tour, which is from 1970 to 1972, this guy Andy Tartaglino was a deputy director of the uh, Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And at that time, a lot of CIA officers were being put out of work because the war in Vietnam was winding down, and they didn't have any place for these guys. And uh, Tully arranged for a number of young CIA officers who were working for him to go to work for Andy Tartaglino at the Bureau of Narcotic and Dangerous Drugs. These CIA officers who were riffed, is what the term was. There was a reduction in forces, RIF, or RIF was going on. And these young CIA officers had nowhere to go. Through his friendship with Andy Tartaglino, Tully arranged for a bunch of them to go to work for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And from approximately 1968, 69 until 73 years went to work for the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and later the DEA. And I found out about this from Tully while I was doing this book, The Phoenix Program. And I was very curious to know, well, how did the DEA and the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs put these CIA officers to work? They were